Question of the hour. The question of the hour to conservatives is: Question of the hour. Are you sheep? Are you sheep? So, excuse me. The context of the question is your perspective regarding Kilmar Garcia deportation story. Are you thinking independently, or are you being controlled? Right? Are you focusing on what the government wants you to? Are you using the government's rhetoric? Or are you independent? Right? Are you all government talking points? Or do you have a unique perspective? So, first of all, in this stream, I'm not going to be talking about opinions on should he have been deported, should he have not been deported. I'm not going to be talking about those types of things, right? Whatever your opinion is, your opinion is. I'm not going to be talking about immigration. You may feel we need to deport more people. You may like what's being done, whatever. That's not what this is about. I just want to establish you can have whatever opinion you want, right? Obviously. But the question is, are your thoughts your own? Or are you being controlled? So, let's first of all establish some basic details here. So, the government regardless of which party is in control, they use forms of propaganda to control what you and I think. Right? They use certain buzzwords, certain phrases. I think I've even heard some conservatives talk about some of these bills where, they will name a bill, whichever party, they'll name a bill something that sounds good and wholesome. Like they may have an act that's called the, Save Our Children Act, right? And the reason they do this is because it's emotional manipulation, right? I mean, the name of the bill is Save the Children Act. I would think that most Americans would want to save our children, right? So the devil's in the details, right? So they're doing one thing, and ultimately they want you to think a certain way about it, right? So they will use certain rhetoric, certain phrases, certain talking points. And that's the next element. So it's about word choice, loaded language, and it's also talking points. So they will literally sit down and decide on certain manipulative phrases that they think will lead the American people to think a certain way about a certain thing, right? And they'll literally have like these talking points. I mean, sometimes we've seen it exposed. I think they did it for Biden and they did it for Trump, where they have literally a piece of paper with like talking points. So these are strategic, attempts to manipulate how we think. So the reason that I bring this up, and the reason I'm isolating this from whatever your opinions are on whether Garcia should be deported or not deported or whatever, is because I want you to understand at least the game that's being played, regardless of administration. This is a government thing, right? Whoever's in office wants you to think a certain way about certain things. In particular, when they're doing things that they know are unpopular or bad things, um, this is the way politics works, right? It's not a good thing if you're doing something that a lot of people don't like. That's not good for you, right? So you're going to want to try to manipulate people into thinking a different way about whatever it is that you're doing, right? So you try to frame it as something else, right? And it's a trick. So the reason that I say these things is because to answer the question about whether you are a sheep as a conservative regarding the Garcia situation, um, you have to first start thinking about, again, this whole propaganda strategy that the government uses. All right. So, taking into consideration what I just said, let's just say that the government currently is doing some really, really bad and dangerous things, violating the Constitution, or just in general doing things that are bad for America, bad for you and I. If that were the case, as usual, like I pointed out before, they're going to want to sort of hide this. They're going to want to frame things a certain way, use certain language. They're going to want to trick you. It's like I'm a real estate guy and I'm trying to I'm trying to sell a house maybe, and the house is really run down, and I describe it as charming, right? Or certain words where I try to I try to paint the negative things about the house in a positive light. So when you hear those words, I'm sort of triggering certain emotions or ideas like, oh, charming. And then, when you look at the house, you're looking at it from that lens. So that can make you have a more positive view of it, right? So if, in fact, Trump and his administration are doing a lot of bad things right now, which a lot of Americans understanding what's being done would have a negative view of the administration, that would be something that they would want to try to avoid. And how do they do it? Exactly what I described, right? They would want to come up with, buzzwords, talking points. They would want to frame things in a certain way. It's not a rundown house; it's a charming house, right? Um, so that being said, let me tell you the tactics that are being used right now, right? So again, remember, the government, regardless of who's in charge, they always try to make you think what they want you to think, putting themselves in the better light, right? So here's the tactics being used right now. Smearing Garcia. So they're trying to say that he's a gangster, right? He's an MS-13 person, right? And I just want you to understand why they're doing this, right? It's a trick. They're trying to essentially, what's the word? Dehumanize him, right? And I don't want to get on a tangent, but this is where we got the concept of race from in this country, right? They were enslaving people who looked like them, and there was a big pushback. So they created this concept of race, so that it's all about framing, right? So that allowed to get away with treating human beings inhumanely, right? So if in fact the government is doing some really, really bad things right now, or very un-American things, um, one way to get away with it, to fool a lot of Americans into looking at it in a more positive light, is if they can make this guy look as bad as possible. He beats his wife. He's a gangster, MS-13 guy, um, and any connection to, like, he doesn't have to do anything, right? The whole point is to get you thinking about this guy as just subhuman, right? It's like slavery all over again, right? So if they start talking about, why should you care about this guy who is, I don't know why my laptop is making funny noises, but why should you care about some guy who, he's a killer? And notice he's not a killer, right? But that's the whole point of mentioning other people who killed or say bad things about the gang and what the gang did. They're trying to manipulate you, right? If they can get you thinking about just the worst of the worst, right? And the thing about it, they know a lot of people are not smart enough to see the connection. It's like, okay, you're talking about murders and rape or whatever, but what does it have to do with this guy? But people aren't really good with critical thinking in this country, so you're not gonna think like that. You're gonna have emotions of like, oh, murderer, rapist, whatever, whatever. Why do we care? And then one thing that does also is that allows you to shut off your emotions. If you're thinking right about what's happening and what's being done, and you consider this guy to be a human being, right? You consider the laws that might be violated to be laws that are relevant to other human beings, then it gets kind of complicated, and you're kind of like, well, are they sure? And you're asking questions, and that's not a good look for the government, right? The government doesn't want you thinking. They don't want you thinking at all. They want you to feel, right? They want you to feel this guy's a murderer, he's a gangster, he beats women, right? So then you just shut off all your empathy, and this guy's dirt, right? Who cares? Due process? Why does he need due process, right? So, just understand that the reason why they are telling you about, well, first of all, let's just understand that these things don't matter. The things that are most important, right? The reason why this is a big story and everyone's focused on it, like that, the important issues has no relevance to him being in a gang or whatever. All these things are irrelevant, right? It's the equivalent of, let's see, let's say that a big Trump supporter was there's a big Trump supporter, right, who is very well known, and the police kind of busted in his house, and they didn't have a warrant, right? So they came in the house with no warrant, violating this guy's rights, right? The Democrats in office, right? They have power, right? And a lot of conservatives are upset and saying this guy, his rights were violated. The police shouldn't have gone in. They didn't have a warrant, blah, blah, blah. This is wrong. Then what does the left do? What's their response? Without a warrant, right? But is that conversation is about? Or I don't know what it is that is. Yes, OBS is giving me some kind of alerts. So is that the conversation that is being had? Right? Or is the left and the Democrats trying to manipulate people into supporting these, illegal acts? Right? So what happens? They find out that this Trump supporter, he was arrested the previous year for selling drugs. They find out that someone in the house is a known gang member, right? They find out that 10 years ago, the Trump supporter whose house that the police busted into um, had a restraining order filed on him by his wife, right? Now imagine, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, whatever, they keep talking about it. This guy was a no good guy and a domestic abuser, and there was a gang member in the house. And this guy that the conservatives want us to be all concerned about. Oh my goodness, they want us to cry and look at how many other people in this country that need help and they don't care about it, right? But conservatives want us to be worried about this guy who was a drug dealer and he's a. What does that have to do with the police violating his rights, breaking in his house without a warrant? That would be the Democrats being very deceptive, trying to manipulate public opinion to support their bad behavior. And any liberal who in that moment is online talking about the guy is a drug dealer and there's drug dealers in the house and he's beating his wife, these would be sheep. Those would be sheep. Democrats and liberals that are online talking about this guy's criminal record and who's in the house and whatever, they would be sheep. Because again, the government specifically went out and put out a narrative trying to smear the guy. He's a gang leader and somebody else was in the house and he beats his wife. That would be Joe Biden trying to get you to ignore that his rights were violated, right? That the law was violated, and to get you to focus on, oh, this guy's a criminal, who cares? So any liberal that's going on Twitter and arguing with conservatives saying, oh, why do you care about this gang dealer, right? Those are the suckers falling for Joe Biden's tricks, falling for the tricks of the Democrats, right? So now everyone's talking about how bad this guy is and did he really beat his wife, did he not beat his wife? And no one's talking about the police went into somebody's house without a warrant, right? They did it to this guy. Next time, it might be you. So conservatives in that moment who, if they're concerned about this guy, his rights being violated, right? It's not about them trying to defend a gangster or trying to defend someone that has a gangster in his house or someone who might have assaulted his wife. Like, it's not about that. In that moment, the conservatives would be talking about this because of the violation of this guy's rights. Now let's flip back to what's happening now. So I saw that buffoon Scott Jennings talking about what did he say? He said, Democrats falling in love with the worst people. Why is it that we pick the worst people to defend or to whatever, right? I'm not a Democrat, never was a Democrat, probably never will be a Democrat. Same thing for the Republican Party. I'm an independent. But the Democrats and the left did not pick Garcia. They didn't pick him. Right? Scott Jennings is a buffoon. The left and the people who are up in arms about what's happening with this guy, they did not pick him. You know who picked him? It was Trump. It was the Trump administration. Right? They could have done this to a quote-unquote nicer person, right? But this is the guy this is the guy they chose, right? And I'm not saying he's a gangster, he's not a gangster. Whatever you think he is, right? If you look at him as he's a very bad person, and what a guy to be worried about. They're not the ones who chose him, right? It's the Trump administration. They chose to deport this guy, right? any other guy in the same situation, you would have the same situation going on with people saying this is unacceptable, right? But once again, if you are online talking about him being a gangster or him talking about him beating his wife, you are a sheep, right? You have fallen for the trick. This is a trick. This is a trick, right? They want to distract you from what's really important. And this narrative about, oh, why they're defending a gangster. Now, with that being considered, understanding that is state propaganda right now, right? That is what the elites, the government wants you to think about, right? The Republican Party, the Trump administration, they want you to look at this guy as a gangster and he's a criminal, right? And they want you to think about, like, why would the Democrats care about this? Like, that's their talking points. So here's an important thing. Is there any distance between what the government wants you to think and what you're getting from right-wing media influencers? Think about that for a second. The government wants you, right? Pam Bondi and all these people, they want you to focus on that this guy he's a gangster, he's MS-13 and he beat his wife and all that kind of stuff. And they're mocking the Democrats and the folks on the left for, like the senator that went down there. Look, this guy's went down to El Salvador to take pictures with a gangster, right? That is what the government. That's the government's tactic right now. So, is the people, the right wing media, are they have something different to say, or are they echoing the manipulation tactics that the government is using? Is there any daylight between the government and your right-wing influencers? Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, Tim Pool, right? Newsmax, Fox News. Any daylight at all? Or are they literally just saying what the government is saying, right? So the government wants you to look at this guy as an MS-13 guy. Are those the same tactics being used by right-wing media? Are they adding any value or interesting perspectives or unique perspectives? Or are they basically acting as the mouth of the state? Like, this is North Korea. That's something for you to answer for yourself. So the reality is, it does not matter whether this guy is MS-13 or not. That is irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. And it is a trick to have people debating, is he or is he not? Just like in the analogy I gave you where, the Democrats are violating someone's rights and they want to trick you by changing the conversation to be about, oh, the guy is a criminal anyway, so who cares, right? That's what the Republican Party is doing right now, right? So I want you to understand that why this is a big deal. The issues at hand make all these accusations irrelevant. Let's say that he is not only MS-13, but he is one of the most notorious MS-13 leaders who has killed 1,000 innocent women. Very bad guy. That would not be relevant one bit. Let's say that he was like a Jeffrey Dahmer type guy and he was eating babies. Right? Not relevant at all. Right? His character and what he did is not relevant at all. And I'll tell you why. Now, although he's not in America, this started in America. And in America, we have something called rule of law, right? And the way things work in this country is that the laws apply or should apply equally to everyone. So even if I'm so called a murderer, I did bad things or whatever, I still have the same rights as everyone else, right? So, for example, if I murdered 1,000 people, they can't just, sentence me to, 100 years in prison or whatever. They need to give me a chance to defend myself. Because you know what? Did I really murder all those people? That's the thing I think a lot of people are struggling with. It's just like people are operating in terms of, he's this bad guy, blah blah blah. But how do we know who anybody is if we don't allow them the right, which we all have, to defend themselves? You might be a citizen of this country. That's not really relevant if you don't have the right to defend yourself, right? You were born in this country. You're a 10th generation American, so you've been in America. Your whole, so many generations of your family have been in America, right? What relevance is that? Who you are and what you've done has no relevance if we are not following the rule of law, which is that everybody has a right to defend themselves, right? Because what you have to understand is if we're just going to go about and say, let the government accuse people of something and then they can take such serious actions, I mean, sending him out to this country in a prison where he could end up stuck there for the rest of his life, and you're not even sure, like, that is what the problem is. And I want you to recognize that Trump doesn't want to talk about this. The government doesn't want to talk about this. And no one in right-wing media wants to talk about this, right? They notice that all they're doing is just repeating what the government is saying, right? Oh, he's MS-13, he's a gangster, he beat his wife. Oh, and then mocking the Democrats for trying to defend. Like, that's all they want, right? If you are engaging in that conversation, you are a sheep. That it is what it is. You don't. Truth hurts, right? You are a sheep. Because again, the intention is for you to talk about and think about these things and not think about what this means. The way that he ended up on that plane and in that country. The danger in terms of the precedents that's being set. Another issue is like the Supreme Court, and then they want to play games on what the word facilitate means. Again, if you're falling for these tricks, right, they can just go and say, oh, facilitate, blah, blah, blah. If you look at the legal documents, you look at the court, what the courts are saying, the fact that he got sent to that country in the first place, the fact that he wasn't able to defend himself, right, before being sent there, and then they have him on a plane, and then they say bring him back, and they send him anyway, and now the courts are saying, let us know what you're doing to facilitate this person, being returned, and then they're just kind of like blowing off like, this is major. But the government doesn't want you thinking about that. Right-wing media doesn't want you thinking about that. Right? They want you to think about he's MS-13 and he beat his wife and whatever. Irrelevant. Let's say he's a wife beater. Let's say he's a big murderer. Irrelevant. Right? Because just like how he's a MS-13 guy and he's a wife beater and whatever, so are you. Right? You may say, oh, I'm not, that's not me. How do I know? How does anybody know? If we don't all get a right to defend ourselves, right, then you are whatever I say you are. You are whatever the government says you are. Government looks at you and they and it doesn't have to be malicious either. It can be by accident. You happen to look like a known gang leader, right? You have the look of a known gang leader. The government comes and snatches you up, and they have this zero tolerance thing of like illegal aliens or members of this gang or whatever. Like they said they want to send citizens there, so it wouldn't even be about illegal alien. It would just be based on where they're headed. It's like, hey, you're a very bad hombre. I think they're now trying to call these gang members, or maybe MS-13 in particular, they want to call them terrorists. So you're a terrorist. They think you look like a terrorist, right? They're wrong, right? But because the American conservative allowed the government to set this precedent of government making accusations and then just acting on it, because of that, because of what you enabled, right? Because you didn't rise up and say that this is not right like the rest of the country, because you fell for the tricks of the government and you fell for the, oh, he's a rapist and he's a this and he's a MS-13. Because of that, right, the government was enabled to do this again. And the next time they do it, you're the one that gets accused of being a terrorist. Next thing you know, you're on a plane, and the way they're operating, they take you and they don't allow you to call anybody, so nobody knows where you are. So you get snatched up by the government. They I'm not even making it a malicious thing. They generally think that you're a gang leader, but you're not, right? You're not able to see an attorney. You're not able to tell anyone where you are so they can see an attorney or do anything for you. So there's nothing to stop them from getting you on that plane. Next thing you know, in El Salvador. Now, if you're a big America First person and you really love America and how great of a country we are, I would hope that you put us in a superior light to El Salvador. So, meaning, I don't think you probably have a lot of faith in the legal system in El Salvador, right? You want to take your chances. I mean, first of all, the fact that you even got that far is bad, but and also it's a prison filled with gang leaders, like some of the most violent people in the world. If the idea that you could be mistakenly shipped off to El Salvador and put in this maximum security prison, which again, I would think an America First person would recognize the beauty of our system here, where you have all these rights, and I don't think anyone would really, no, I don't think any conservative really would be worried about in America, ending up in some prison somewhere by accident, and then nobody knows where you are, and you know what I mean. Like you're not. That's not even in your mind, because you're like way before that. Your rights would protect you from that outcome. And even if you make it to some prison and you're not supposed to be there, you're gonna get your phone call. You're gonna get your phone call, even if you don't have any money. You're gonna get free legal representation, right? But we're talking about opening a door where you could end up in another country where you don't have all that. If that doesn't terrify you, I don't know what to tell you. But again, this is why this is important, right? The risk to all of us. Like, I'm going to straight up say it. Fuck this guy, right? I mean, I, as a human person, I care about other people or whatever, but I mean, there's billions of people on the planet. I'm not going to specially be concerned about this one guy who I don't know, right? Maybe he was a good father, maybe he wasn't. I don't know this guy. I never met him, right? So I'm not gonna overly be focused on this Garcia guy. Fuck Garcia, right? I'm worried about America. I'm worried about Americans, right? I'm worried about our fellow Americans and what this means. That's what the concern is. It's nothing about this guy. So it's very interesting. It's kind of like, they set this decoy of talking about MS-13, whatever. Who cares what this guy's done or who he is or what record? Irrelevant, right? This system of everyone has a right to defend themselves. It's funny, the talking point, we talk about manipulation. One example of that is like Israel has a right to defend itself. That was an intentional talking point coming straight from the state. And we had a bunch of right-wing media folks and some left-wing media folks talking about right to defend himself, right? And then you see the interviews and they keep using that phrase, right? But But every American has a right to defend themselves, right? And if they're able to ship this guy off the way they did, without him being able to call anyone, no one even knew where he were for a while. If they could do it to him, they could do it to you, they could do it to me. I don't know if many of you conservatives have thought about this, or maybe you don't see it that way for some reason. I don't know what your argument would be. Um, you know, I don't understand. I mean, what? Give me an explanation for why this is not a dangerous precedent. I mean, what is stopping ICE from snatching you up, mistaking identity, and you ending up on a plane? Like if we're not all allowed our phone calls, all allowed legal representation, I mean the normal stuff we normally do. If that's not across the board, everyone, right? Then what is your protection from being you or your family member just scooped up and ending up in this maximum security prison with a bunch of, like, people say this guy's MS-13, others are saying he's not. Well, I'll tell you what's not in debate. The people in that prison are absolutely gangsters, dangerous. I mean, another debate is what percentage of them are that. But if you're thinking that, people are for some reason in love with this guy, like, fuck Garcia. Obviously, that there's a lot of people that are, in this country super emotional, and also very sort of tribal. So I certainly, can imagine there's lots of people who are getting caught up in terms of, oh, he's a father and whatever, whatever. But even those people, I would think that most of them also realize that this is much bigger than him, right? So here's something else to consider. If what the government is doing is just, if what Trump is doing is just, if Pam Bondi knows what she's doing is just, then why are they manipulating people? Why are they being dishonest? Right? Why is there such an attempt to paint this guy as a bad guy when that's not even relevant to the core issue? Like, why is Pam Bondi looking up, oh, he did this, and he did, like, irrelevant. He's a serial killer. He kills babies. Irrelevant. Right? I mean, again, imagine if you literally have a serial killer living on my block who has killed 500 people, and with no warrant, no nothing. You know, I don't know how they found out. Maybe an officer knows one of the victims, and they just go and bring the SWAT team, and they just blast into the house and knock down the walls. No warrant, no nothing. Right? Now, this guy's disgusting. He needs to be locked up, right? But this is America. Like, the idea of the SWAT team just showing up at your house and like, oh, you're a serial killer, we're coming to take you, like, what? And again, why is that a problem? Because how do we know the guy's a serial killer? What if he's not? Like, that's the reason why we have these laws, right? Because we can't afford to be wrong with these types of things. You can't afford to. There cannot be a way to accidentally ship off someone to this maximum security prison who doesn't belong there. That should not be It should not be. That should not be possible, right? Because again, if everyone gets due process, then everyone has the ability to prove like whether the government is correct or not. So therefore, any mistakes the government makes, you know, you stop it, right? But if we're gonna have this system of like letting the government just make an accusation and then act on it in silence, you can't even. That's the thing. It'd be one thing if they just like take this guy and deport him, but they give him his normal rights of like phone calls and stuff. So people know what's going on and they know where he is, and they can at least try to do something as opposed to people getting disappeared and no one even knows where they are, right? So I'm gonna end this live stream, but one of the other things. So I think we talked about MS-13 stuff. So I think I talked about the fact that it's about due process, right? It's about due process. Constitution protects everyone on U.S. soil, citizen or not, from illegal government actions. If the government can ignore court orders, deport someone illegally, then they can do it to you next, right? So it doesn't matter if Garcia is likable. It's that we are a nation of laws, not vibes or suspicions, right? The Democrats get in power. We don't want Democrats, saying Trump, what he was doing actually was a good idea. We like this Venezuela thing. I don't know why I said Venezuela. El Salvador thing, right? And then they designate MAGA as terrorists, as some of them are, but whatever. They designate MAGA as terrorists, right? And then they go around and, people with red hats, or you got a Trump flag or MAGA thing or whatever, and they're like, you're one of these terrorist groups. And maybe you've done nothing wrong. You like Trump and you have his flag up or whatever, but they associate you as a terrorist, and they're able to scoop you up and send you to another country, and your family doesn't know, right? And then if it comes out, it's kind of like, hey man, what are you talking about? Like when Trump was president, he did the same thing, and you guys were okay with it, so how is it a problem now, right? We don't want to set that precedent, man. I mean, I could also mention the fact that he has no criminal conviction either here or in El Salvador. But again, whether he's a criminal or not is not relevant to the scenario. And then there's also another game that they're playing is they talk about he's in his country. He's in his country. So the idea of deporting is bringing him back here is like it's ridiculous. I think they'll even say stuff like he's home. He's not home, right? Just because you were born somewhere, that doesn't mean you're home, right? Home is where the heart is, right? His home is in the United States. He was not legally in the United States, so unfortunately, he's not entitled to remain in his home. But his home is in the United States, not in El Salvador, right? He hasn't been in El Salvador in a very, very long time. That's not his home. That is his country. That is where he's from. That's his nationality. But it's not his home, right? His home is here, right? And again, even though he's not entitled to be here, as far as I know, it's still his home, right? Then beyond that, the thing is, I believe he's eligible for deportation or whatever. So deporting him is not a problem, I believe, and that's totally fine, right? But all that means is you bring him back home to the United States, right? That's where he lives, and then you figure out where you're gonna send him to, right? Anywhere but El Salvador. That's what the law says. That's what was written by the courts. You can deport him, but not to El Salvador. So yes, people saying, "Oh, well, you're gonna bring him back, or they're gonna just deport him again." Whatever. Like, how is that our problem, right? I mean, this is kind of like the people saying that this is your rhetoric, and in this situation, like that would be the appropriate response. Like, it's not our problem. He's not a citizen. It's not a citizen. He wasn't here legally. So, if they're gonna deport him, I mean, yes, it's sad or whatever, family, whatever. But I mean, lots of things in life are sad. That's not our problem, right? But the bottom line is he should not be in the country that he's in, right? They should have not sent him there in the first place. And the idea of bringing him back home doesn't mean necessarily that he's going to stay here, because I mean he's not a legal citizen, and in this current climate, I don't see how he'd be allowed to stay here. So yeah, they'd probably bring him back here, and then Trump administration would deport him somewhere else, and then it's kind of like then it's no longer that big of a scandal. I mean, sure, there's people that talk about it's inhumane and people trying to get a better life and whatever, but that's not the big thing. The big thing is just deporting somebody without due process, which is something that is dangerous for all of us, right? That's the bigger issue, right? The amount of people that are going to be upset that he gets brought back here and then sent to some other country, I mean, tiny in comparison to the amount of people that are upset that a person, right, whoever he is, got sent to El Salvador in the way that he was, right? That is the massive issue. That is why everyone is, not everyone, but that's why there's so much energy around like what's going on, because this is a danger to all of us, including the many conservatives that are defending the Trump administration. You are also at risk of this kind of behavior, right? So what people are concerned about is something that is that you benefit from, right? I mean, sending a strong message that this is unacceptable behavior, that do not just deport people like that, is important for all of us, right? You might be so sick and tired of all these illegal immigrants and whatever. You could be the most hawkish person about get them all out, but even you need to feel safe in your own country, that maliciously or accidentally there's no chance of you getting shipped to another country. I know most people are just very selfish, and I think many of them they say, well, I don't look like a illegal immigrant, so like that would never happen to me. But we've seen people recently that didn't look like immigrants that found themselves in trouble, right? I think even in Florida, was somebody who got detained for some hours. There was somebody on the Canada border. So, don't be as foolish as I was. When I was younger, I used to think, a lot of these people complaining about police, I thought it was their own fault. I would look at them and they dress a certain way, and I'm just like, you look like a criminal, so of course the police are bothering you. See, I, like many of you, was thinking in a very savage way, right? I'm just sort of, it's a dehumanizing sort of thought process, kind of like, this guy's a criminal, so who cares about his rights? Who cares about the law, right? The police need to harass the criminals, right? Criminal, look at you with your penguin down or whatever. Like, yeah, go harass them. And then me, Mr. Well-spoken guy, friendly, easygoing guy, was it 7 o'clock in the morning on my way to work, waiting for a record truck, ended up in handcuffs for the first time because I got accused of spraying graffiti on a wall, which I didn't do. And even though I was totally nice and friendly and compliant with the officer, he for some reason decided to put me in handcuffs, and I sat in the back of his car for 45 minutes while he's trying to find some kind of legal justification, which he couldn't find, for doing what he's doing. Then he ended up lying. Then I tried to call the station to make a complaint, and they intimidated me on the phone. So I never even made a complaint because I didn't feel comfortable going in there, right? So I learned a hard lesson that yes, some people get profiled based on how they look. They may look criminals or whatever, but the thing about it is, the same way that their rights might get violated, so can mine, right? I'm well spoken, well dressed, whatever. It doesn't matter. If I'm okay with the guy who looks like a criminal having his rights violated, then that means I'm okay with it happening to me too. If you're okay with some guy who supposedly is the MS-13 or whatever, having his rights violated and just getting deported without ability to defend himself, then you're okay with that happening to you and everybody else and people that you care about. So the next thing is the government is breaking the rules. So your court said that he must be returned. Trump is defying that. So that is not owning the libs, right? That's executive overreach, something that I thought conservatives really cared about. When the president can ignore courts, we're no longer in the thing that many conservatives would say that we're not in anyway, which is a democracy. Everyone that says that we're not in a democracy, I've never heard one of them explaining why, in terms of defining what democracy means and distinguishing between that and what we have. Right? The best I've ever heard is people try to do the trick of talking about a direct democracy, which we're not. Right? As if that's the only type of democracy. Democratic Republic. Hybrid form of government. Democracy is definitely part of it. The other part is the republic. But conservatives like the sound of constitutional republic better. Right? Even though whatever words they use, the definition of those words is basically the same thing as when we say Democratic Republic, but still, I don't want that word, that D word. Oh my goodness. Like, that's what it is. Like, it's literally, they don't like the sound of the word democracy. Right? Anyway, any comments, any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to end this live stream. And the final statement is, like I said, if you are literally using the same words that the government is, and you're focused on, like, there's different parts of the story, right? There is this guy's an MS-13 guy, he beat his wife, he's an illegal immigrant, right? He was eligible to be deported, right? That's one part of the story, right? The other part is he was shipped off without due process in terms of that process, right? So he wasn't able to defend himself and say, prove that he is or he isn't a gang member. He wasn't able to be like, hey, I'm not supposed to go to this country, right? And then the courts agree, and then they say, okay, you can deport him, but you gotta send like somewhere else. Like, that's the way due process would have worked, right? In due process, it's kind of like, okay, we agree that you can deport this guy, but you can't go to that particular country because here's the court order, blah, blah, blah. Okay, judge agrees. Okay, so, hey, government, you can deport him, but you gotta send him somewhere else. So they send him somewhere else, and then we never even hear about this guy because it's kind of like, it's just a guy getting deported who shouldn't have been here. So there's a part of the story that's he's a bad guy, he's a criminal, whatever. The other part of it is the lack of due process. They're sending him without him being able to call anybody, people not knowing where he is, right? That is the very scary and dangerous part of the situation, right? So I don't know if I locked up or not. The government wants you to focus on this part of the story, right? But this is the really, really important part of the story. If you're only focused on this part, which is, again, what the government wants you to think about, you're a sheep. I'm sorry to say. You are a sheep, right? The talk about this kind of stuff is intentional to distract you from the more important issue, right? So, there you have it. This is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.